Good afternoon. The SERS board meeting is now being recorded for record-keeping purposes. By participating in the session, you're consenting to the recording, retention, and future viewing of this meeting. This meeting is now being live-streamed. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, this is the regular meeting of the State Employees Retirement Board. It's now coming to order February 24th, 2021 at 12:52 p.m. By the way, I got my first COVID shot on Monday. Hopefully, a lot of you have been getting it. I'm old and frail, so I got one. I was in the front of the line. But also today, in 1954, Dr. Jonas Salk, right outside of Pittsburgh, gave the first polio vaccine to 137 kids. And then it started right across the United States. So it's a good day for Pennsylvania and also for the healthcare industry in general. Also, I'd like to introduce two new board members, Treasurer Stacy Garrity and Representative Paul Schemmel. They were both assigned committees and were active in that participation, and thank you and welcome aboard, both of you. With that, I'd like to have a roll call of the board members. Terry Sanchez.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Becker.
Present.
Senator DeSanto.
Present.
Chair Philman.
Present.
Mr. Acco on behalf of Representative Frankel.
Designee present.
Treasurer Garrity.
Present.
Ms. Marchowski on behalf of Senator Hughes.
Present.
Mr. Jordan.
Here.
Representative Schemmel.
Present.
Ms. Soderberg.
Here.
Mr. Thal.
Present.
Secretary Vague.
Here.
Thank you. We have a full board today, Chairman.
Thank you all for participating. Going right into the agenda, a motion is in order to adopt the agenda for February 24th, 2021 for the board meeting. Could I hear a motion to that effect?
So moved.
I hear a motion. Do I hear a second? I hear a second. We could do a voice vote, correct, Terry?
Correct.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. And also we need the approval of the consent calendar. A motion is in order to approve the consent calendar items as listed for the February 24th, 2021 board meeting. Motion to that effect, please.
So moved.
I hear a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I hear a second. Anyone on the question? Hearing none. All in favor, aye? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is carried. With that, we'll go right into the committee reports. And the first one up is Chair Soderberg with the Finance and Member Services Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance and Member Services Committee met yesterday morning at 8:36. The first order of business was electing myself, Mary Soderberg, as chair of the Finance and Member Services Committee. And following that, we appointed Secretary Richard Vague as the assistant chairperson to the committee. And before I go on, let me note that my full report is posted on board docs, so I'll just kind of summarize the committee meeting. Sarah McSturdy reviewed the committee's work plan for the upcoming year. We will be holding meetings in conjunction with each board meetings coming up. Christopher Houston, who's the Deputy Executive Director for Administration, reviewed some changes to our committee charter. The committee accepted and approved those changes, and those will now go to the Board of Governance and Personnel Committee for further review. Ms. McSturdy gave us a high-level mid-year budget update, and she then went on to give us an overview of the agreement with the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education, which will include, this is an agreement similar to what we did with Penn State last year, where PASHE will be giving us a lump sum payment of $825 million or 75% of their unfunded actuarial liability in exchange for set-off credits over a 30-year period. So this is all being finalized and should come to, hopefully, fruition later this spring. I will have a motion at the end of my report on that issue. Then Sarah also gave us an update on the financial management staffing, and this was of concern just because we've really been understaffed in that office for quite a while, and we're just about totally fully staffed at this point. And I just want to, not only has this office done an amazing job, I just want to do a real shout out to all the staff at SERS, because I know this has been a crazy year for everyone. Things like holding our board meeting virtually weren't even a concept a year ago, and now they're just so routine. It's pretty amazing. But the Office of Financial Management had some additional hurdles. Not only were they dealing with the reorganization and trying to manage all the necessary accounting processes virtually, but literally 50% of their staff have just been hired in the last 2 years. So, they did a yeoman's job with some very relatively inexperienced staff, and they're now all very experienced. So I just want to thank them all very much for their efforts. Then finally, we had a brief review about fees for defined contribution, deferred compensation plans, and we will be talking further about that at our March retreat. So, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I would like to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I move that the State Employees Retirement Board, 1, enter into the attached funding agreement between the State Employees Retirement Board and the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education pursuant to Section 5508.1A, subsection A of the State Employees Retirement Code, including the annual set-off schedule contained in Exhibit A to the funding agreement, subject to required Commonwealth legal approvals. 2, accept the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education's lump sum payment in the amount of $825 million to be applied towards its unfunded actuarial accrued liability pursuant to the funding agreement, provided that the payment is received by April 30th, 2021, and that the opinion of counsel required in paragraph 6B of the funding agreement has been provided to the board in a form acceptable to the board and to board counsel. Number 3, certify that the annual set-off amount for the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education under the funding agreement for fiscal year July 1, 2021 through June 30th, 2022 is $79,939,555, effective upon the receipt of the lump sum payment of $825 million pursuant to the funding agreement. Number 4, certify that for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2021, for the first 24 pay periods of the biweekly payroll cycle, the annual set-off credit to the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education shall be $3,330,815, subject to any modification as provided for in the funding agreement. And number 5, delegate to the Secretary of the Board and the administrative staff of the State Employees Retirement System to 1, determine annually the amount of the annual set-off credit allocated to each pay period under each payroll cycle to the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education for fiscal years beginning on or after July 1, 2022, and 2, annually certify those credits to the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. Thank you.
Been properly moved. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I hear a second. I do hear a second. With that, we'll have a roll call vote.
Mr. Becker?
Aye.
Senator DeSanto?
Aye.
Chair Philman,
Aye.
Representative Frankel,
Aye.
Treasurer Garrity,
Aye.
Christopher Craig on behalf of Treasurer Garrity. Thank you. Ms. Marchowski on behalf of Senator Hughes.
Aye.
Mr. Jordan,
Aye.
Representative Schemmel,
Aye.
Ms. Soderberg,
Aye.
Mr. Thal,
Aye.
Secretary Vague.
Aye.
That's unanimous vote, Chair Philman.
Okay, thank you. Mary, anything else?
That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now go into Investment Committee. Chair Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had a very productive meeting of the Investment Committee yesterday. It was called to order at 9:53. We had the committee elections. I will continue as the chair for the coming year, and Dave Philman will continue as the assistant chair. We approved the minutes of the December 1 meeting. Bill Trong reviewed the 2021 Investment Committee work plan. Seth Kelly and Chris Houston provided a review of the Investment Committee charter, some changes that are being made, mostly technical in nature. These will be sent to the Board Governance and Personnel Committee for consideration and enacting at a later date. Seth Kelly then reviewed the Investment Committee 2020 accomplishments and the 2021 goals. We then had representatives from Cowen review the quarterly performance analysis for the defined benefit, defined comp, and defined contribution plans. Then Seth Kelly, Dave Felix, and Mike Ilio of Stepstone introduced a private equity opportunity from Hellman and Freeman Capital Partners. Hellman and Freeman is an existing manager for us. Upon presentation, a motion was passed by vote of 8 yes, 1 no, to recommend to the board an investment in Hellman and Freeman's Capital Partners Fund 10. And I would like to read that if I could.
Go ahead.
I move that the board accept the recommendation of the investment committee to commit up to $125 million to Hellman and Freeman Capital Partners 10 LP plus investment expenses and pro rata share of partnership operating expenses consistent with executed partnership documents as a follow-on investment within the private equity asset class, subject to successful completion of contract negotiations and execution and delivery of closing documents by all parties, including required Commonwealth legal approvals within 12 months.
It's been properly moved. Do I hear a second? Do I hear a second?
Second.
I hear a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Becker,
Aye.
Senator DeSanto,
Aye.
Chair Philman,
Aye.
Representative Frankel,
Aye.
Mr. Craig on behalf of Treasurer Garrity,
No.
Ms. Marchowski on behalf of Senator Hughes,
Aye.
Mr. Jordan,
Aye.
Representative Schemmel,
Aye.
Ms. Soderberg,
Aye.
Mr. Thal,
Aye.
Secretary Vague.
Aye.
That's 10 yeas and 1 nay, Chairman.
Thank you very much. It passes. Committee report.
Okay, thank you. Next, we had Seth Kelly provided an introduction of Mellon's U.S. high-yield enhanced index strategy, and this will be an important component in our new fixed income structure. And following the presentation, a motion was passed by vote of, actually it was a unanimous vote, to recommend to the board an investment in this strategy. And I would like to read that motion, please.
Go ahead.
I move that the board accept the recommendation of the investment committee to commit up to $500 million to BNYM Mellon DBSL High Yield Beta Fund as an investment within the fixed income asset class, subject to successful completion of contract negotiations and execution and delivery of closing documents by all parties, including required Commonwealth legal approvals within 12 months.
It's been properly moved. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I hear a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Becker,
Aye.
Senator DeSanto,
Aye.
Chair Philman,
Aye.
Representative Frankel,
Sorry, aye.
Mr. Craig on behalf of Treasurer Garrity,
Yes, aye.
Ms. Marchowski on behalf of Senator Hughes,
Aye.
Mr. Jordan,
Aye.
Representative Schemmel,
Aye.
Ms. Soderberg,
Aye.
Mr. Thal,
Aye.
Secretary Vague.
Aye.
A unanimous vote, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Committee report.
Great, thank you. Next, Seth Kelly provided an introduction. Seth informed us, the IC committee, of the upcoming expiration of Stepstone's contract. Stepstone is our consultant on the private market side. And a motion was made by a unanimous vote to recommend to the board an extension of the Stepstone contract for 18 months. And I would like to read that motion.
Go ahead.
I move that the board accept the recommendation of the investment committee to authorize an extension of the agreement between SERS and Stepstone Group LLC for private equity consulting services for 18 months. That will be until October 4, 2022, under the existing terms, services, and fee schedules, subject to successful completion of contract negotiations and execution and delivery of closing documents by all parties, including required Commonwealth legal approvals prior to its expiration.
It's been properly moved. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I hear a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Becker,
Aye.
Senator DeSanto,
Aye.
Chair Philman,
Aye.
Representative Frankel,
Aye.
Mr. Craig on behalf of Treasurer Garrity,
Aye.
Ms. Marchowski on behalf of Senator Hughes,
Aye.
Mr. Jordan,
Aye.
Representative Schemmel,
Aye.
Ms. Soderberg,
Aye.
Mr. Thal,
Aye.
Secretary Vague.
Aye.
A unanimous vote, Chair Philman.
Okay, thank you. The motion passes. Anything further, Chair Becker?
We did not, there was no break for executive session yesterday, but we did post several documents for informational purposes. You can find them on board docs. Any questions, please forward them on to the investment committee, or the investment team, the investment office. And that, with no further business, we adjourned the meeting at 11:42, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Chair. Next up is Chair Thal with Audit, Risk, and Compliance Committee.
Thank you, Chairman Philman. Yesterday at 12:55, the Audit, Risk, and Compliance Committee met. First order of business was to elect officers. I was elected chair, and Treasurer Garrity was elected assistant chair. Then we went over the work plan, as well as the Audit, Risk, and Compliance Charter, of which we did make some changes that will be in front of the Board Governance Committee at their next meeting, and then hopefully in front of the full board for their consideration. Then we did have a lengthy executive session to review a number of items, including our network vulnerability, lengthy update from our Chief Information Security Officer, and his plans to continue to protect all of our members' and participants' information and data, as well as reports from our audit team led by Ms. Lynn on manager fee validation, due diligence, and our risk assessment and internal audit plan. All of these presentations are available up on board doc, and I urge all members of the board to look at them. There's a lot of good information there. At the conclusion of our executive session, we ended our meeting, albeit over time, and that is my submission of my report, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair Thal. We'll now go into the Board Governance and Personnel Committee report. The Board Governance and Personnel Committee met yesterday, February 23rd at 2021 at 3:04 p.m. All of the committee was in attendance, themselves or their designees. The first bit of business was the election of the committee chair. I was elected again as committee chair. Thank you very much. We then went into a fiduciary review and self-assessment update with Chris Houston, providing the update on the committee, to the committee on the fiduciary review and self-assessment being conducted by Funston Advisory Services. Most of you had received that questionnaire. Also, the overview of the purpose to conduct a fiduciary and governance review of the board's performance of its duties in 4 task areas. The rest of it's in your board docs. Also, to assist the board in its review and assessment of its performance and identify subject areas that may be appropriate for educational training and sessions. The formation of a steering committee comprised of members of the board governance and senior staff. Draft reports for both the fiduciary review and self-assessment will be reviewed by that committee in the end of March for receipt for input from the committee. And then final reports are anticipated for the April committee and board meetings. After that, we had an appointment of assistant chair, unanimous consent to the appointment of Senator Hughes as assistant chair. Thank you, Senator. Also, review of the 2021 Board Governance and Personnel Committee work plan, a review of the Board Governance and Personnel Committee charter, and those proposed changes are attached to this report, but will not be acted on by this board at this time. Instead, the board will be asked to vote approving the proposed changes along with the changes to other committee charters, hopefully at the next SERS board meeting. We did have a review of the board education policy. There are some changes to that, or updates, I should say. Reviewed the proposed changes to provide for changes to the education requirement for board members and to establish education requirements for the members of the Audit, Risk, and Compliance Committee as required by Act 2020-128. Starting in 2022, board members and designees will be required to successfully complete at least 10 hours of total training annually, investment strategies, actuarial cost analysis, asset allocation, risk assessment, and retirement portfolio management. And these are the new mandatory categories are asset allocation and risk assessment. Also, newly appointed as voting members to the Audit, Risk, and Compliance Committee on or after today, they must commit to complete 16 hours of training in risk assessments, internal controls, and auditing standards within 90 days of their appointment. To continue serving as a voting member, there is a requirement to complete at least 8 hours of training on these topics each calendar year. They took action to recommend to the State Employees Retirement Board to approve the amendments to board education policy. So I do have a formal motion to the board. It was passed unanimously by the committee. And I move that the State Employees Retirement Board accept the recommendation of the Board Governance and Personnel Committee to approve the amendments to the board education policy as set forth in the attached. It's properly moved. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I do hear a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Becker?
Aye.
Senator DeSanto?
Aye.
Chair Philman?
Aye.
Representative Frankel?
Aye.
Treasurer Garrity or Mr. Craig on her behalf?
I'm back.
Thank you.
Aye. Sure.
Thank you. Ms. Marchowski on behalf of Senator Hughes?
Aye.
Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Representative Schemmel?
Aye.
Ms. Soderberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hall?
Aye.
Secretary Vague?
Aye.
Thank you. That's a unanimous vote, Chairman.
Thank you very much. To continue on, there is a review of the board self-assessment policy, and there were no changes to be made at this time. Review of the board bylaws, a technical correction to section 1.1 of the bylaws to be consistent with the board composition requirements of the State Employees Retirement Code. That includes and provides that at least 5 members of the board can be active participants in the State Employees Defined Contribution Plan or, as is already stated, active members of the state employees retirement system. Also reviewed a provision included in Act 2020-128, amending Section 5901 of the State Employees Retirement Code by adding subsection G2, which provides as follows, and it talks about establishing an executive committee consisting of the board chair plus chairs of the subcommittees. There was much discussion over this, and the committee felt that since we do have and got off the ground very successfully, our subcommittees, that it does not, and the provisions does not require an executive committee. We felt at this time it was better to just table that and possibly look at it in the near future. So we did not take any action on that. In executive session, the committee entered into executive session to discuss the annual salary adjustments for investment professionals, excluding the CIO. And then following discussion in executive session regarding the salary adjustments, excluding the CIO for the investment staff professionals, the committee took action to approve salary adjustments for investment professionals effective the first full pay period of March 2021, as per the attached. Part of that was in last month's meeting, in December, I should say. So we just came full circle and completed this. And this is a sole purview of the Board Governance and Personnel Committee, and that's for your information only. So with that, I conclude the report of the Board Governance and Personnel Committee.
Mr. Chairman, Chris Halstein, can I just add one thing?
Yes, sir.
On the bylaws, so even though the committee took action, there's a 15-day advance written notice requirement to provide copies of the revised bylaws to the board. So therefore, it won't be until the April meeting that the board will act on those amendments. I just wanted to point that out.
So noted. Very well.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll go into the Defined Contribution Committee. Again, Chair Soderberg.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Defined Contribution Committee met this morning at 9:18, and the first order of business was electing the chairperson, which is myself, Mary Soderberg, and the appointment of the assistant chairperson, who is Representative Dan Frankel. The committee listened to a review of the Defined Contribution Committee work plan by Bill Trong of the Investment Office, and then we discussed the committee charter with Chris Houston. We've got some technical changes that we approved and will be sent to the Board of Governance and Personnel Committee for further review before these are put together with the other charter changes of other committees. Sarah McSurdy set up the whole issue of the entire board beginning to look at the defined contribution fees. We had an educational session right before lunch, and we'll be discussing the whole issue in further detail at our retreat later this spring. We also had a review on the current target funds for the system by Callan Associates, and that was the end of our business. But I would like to just say, doing a committee meeting on the day of the board creates unusual challenges, and sometimes the committee chair contributes to those challenges. And I just want to say thank you for the little turmoil that I created when I misread some of the notes. And I appreciate all the staff jumping up and getting the notes finalized and submitted in a timely and correct fashion, in spite of me. So thank you very much. And our meeting adjourned at 10:05 a.m. this morning. And that's all I have to report, sir.
Thank you, Chair Soderberg. And our final committee report is the Securities Litigation. Chair Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Securities Litigation Committee met this morning at 10:10 a.m. All committee members were in attendance for the meeting. I'd like to note that State Representative Paul Schemmel is a newly appointed member of the Securities Litigation Committee, and we'd like to welcome him to the committee. The first order of business was the election of a chairperson. The committee elected me to be chairperson for the upcoming year. We appointed State Senator Vincent Hughes as the assistant chair. Christopher Houston gave us an overview of the Securities Litigation Committee work plan for 2021, and he also led a discussion on proposed amendments to the committee charter. These changes are largely technical and conforming changes to align the charter with recent organizational and statutory changes. These proposed changes are attached to this report in board docs, but will not be acted on by the board at this time. Instead, the board governance committee will consider these changes and make a recommendation to the full board at a future meeting. And at that future meeting, the board will be asked to vote approving the proposed changes. In addition to those items of business, Deputy Chief Counsel Jeff McCormick gave us an update on the Porsche and Volkswagen litigation cases. He reviewed the class action receipts for 2020 in the third quarter and summarized and presented the 2020 Securities Litigation Annual Report. At approximately 10:42 a.m., the committee went into executive session to discuss a securities litigation matter. The executive session ended at 10:54 a.m. and following the executive session, the committee passed a motion unanimously authorizing the executive director, the chief investment officer, and the chief counsel of the SERS system to move forward in filing an amicus brief in the matter of Goldman Sachs versus Arkansas Teachers Retirement System if they collectively find it in the best interest of the system and receive delegation from the Office of Attorney General. The meeting then adjourned at 10:58 a.m. And I believe that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. With that completes the committee reports. Old business, there is none. New business, there is an indication Alan Flanigan wants to have the floor. Alan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I've got I should have thought that. So in response to last Friday's article that was published in the Philly Inquirer that referenced former board member treasurer Torsella, Secretary Megan asked me to make a brief statement for the public record. So, in summary, we really don't believe that article reflects the SERS of today, nor does it reflect the SERS team and SERS board that we've come to know. When the Act 5 Commission was originally created, it was done so for a reason. Both SERS and PSERS needed change, more transparency and public accountability, more focus on fees and expenses, and improvements to their board governance. SERS was in a very different place than what we have today. Our executive director was brand new to the job, and the investment team needed leadership and cohesive direction. But that's no longer the SERS that we have today. Following the Act 5 Commission's work, this board was very proactive. Under the leadership of Chair Philman and Executive Director Sanchez, we undertook a process whereby this board systematically and diligently reviewed the Commission's over 100 recommendations, most of which we have implemented. We have had thoughtful and productive dialogue around these topics, conversations that have pushed us to evolve and think in new ways. And as a result, over the past 2 years, we have accomplished a great deal. We've become more transparent, publishing investment information, actuarial and risk information, and now live streaming board meetings. We've improved our board governance framework, implementing a new committee structure and governance policies, and creating the position of Chief Compliance Officer. And we've undertaken extensive efforts to rein in investment fees and expenses, shifting the portfolio toward low-cost solutions, renegotiating manager contracts, and finding innovative ways to save fund dollars, like our co-investment program. And during a year filled with tremendous uncertainty, this team, the SERS team, and the SERS board, really rose to the occasion, and we posted an 11.11% rate of return and added over $3 billion in value to the fund. And our performance over the past year in navigating the operational challenges we've had, and as investors, is performance that we should be proud to stand behind. So for the record, here's the SERS that we see. We have a board comprised of very capable and diligent individuals who take great pride in their service of our membership. We engage in thoughtful and productive dialogue, and we unify around the leadership of our chairman, Dave Philman, to provide this organization with direction. We have an executive director in Terry Sanchez that continually goes above and beyond the call of duty. She's proactive, forward-thinking, and executes the board's direction with great enthusiasm. And more important than any recommendation of the Act 5 Commission, she and the executive team have fostered transparency and accountability as the new cultural norm. We have a new CIO in Seth Kelly who understands the fundamental purpose of our investment portfolio, to provide benefit payments to our members. He's demonstrated great competence and skill and helped us think differently about how we improve SERS' financial position over the long term. He is supported by a team of skilled professionals who, when things got crazy last March, stepped up to the challenge under the leadership of then acting CIO and now Deputy Jim Nolan. Over the past 2 years, SERS has fostered a culture where thoughtful and productive dialogue is now the norm. Divergent views are respected and appreciated as opportunities for us to think differently about issues rather than being treated with cynicism or distrust. We recognize and respect differences of opinion, but there's no question that every member of this board, the SERS executive team, and SERS staff are all united in our mission to serve the SERS membership. We're by no means perfect, but we've made great strides over the past 2 years, and we have no doubt that we will continue to do so going forward. With this board and this SERS team, we believe SERS is well on its way to becoming a leader in the public pension fund industry, and our members should rest assured knowing their future is well served by the SERS organization. So on behalf of Secretary Begg, we're happy to serve as your trustee, and we're proud to stand by the people and the work of this great organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan, and thank you, Secretary Begg. I want to reemphasize the fact that it was the whole board also involved with this. All of you come from different backgrounds, but I think you all understand there's one goal here, and to provide the benefit for state employees and various employees. We have beyond state, we have other entities that are involved to provide a quality product for them so they can enjoy their retirement. So thank you very much again. Okay. With that, we have a special presentation, Board Education, Role of Equity in the Fund. CIO Seth Kelly, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I only have an hour, and I will do my level best to keep it to that. So as I go through here, what you'll see me do is spend not a lot of time on the detail, because the detail we will cover in future meetings. And rest assured that you will not be asked to make any decisions until you're comfortable with the information you have. I would not believe that the information I present today would be enough to make you comfortable. So just know that. So if you could, Katie, if you could advance the slide for me. So what are we here to do? We're here to pay the liability. We also call the liability the benefit payment most of the time, right? So how can we think about the way we create enough cash flow to pay the benefit payment? So it's really kind of a simple formula. The portfolio cash flow is the portfolio value times the portfolio yield. And if your portfolio cash flow is less than the, I should have put here, net benefit payment, you need to sell assets and pay commissions and bid-ask spreads. If your portfolio cash flow is equal to the net benefit payment, what you make in dividends and interest flows through to the benefit payment. There's nothing more you have to do. And if your portfolio cash flow is greater than the benefit payment, you reinvest the excess, your net benefit payment. So how is this important to what we do? Katie, if you could advance the slide for me. Let's just take this example. This is a real example. This is what goes on this year. So we expect to have about $3.1 billion of total cash flow coming in. 2.6 of that comes from the state's contribution, so that goes to pay benefits. And then the portfolio, just through dividends and interest and distributions from things like REITs, earns $483 million. So we have I have a Dan Acco would like in. We have about $3.7 billion that we have to pay in benefit payments. So the net between those two, what we have coming in and what we have going out, bear with me here. This is rounding, so it's about $645 million. So right now, what we would have to do, if you think about it, is once a month hit the market for $645 million divided by 12, so somewhere a little over $50 million. And you have to buy and sell to do it. You pay transaction costs. So the more efficient you can get your cash flow, the less expensive it is to the fund, because paying commissions and bid asks and things like that is not necessarily cheap if you have to do it all the time. So what I want to do is I want to break down this yield component, that portfolio cash flow line, just a little bit more. And Katie, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide. So again, these are the same numbers. I've just added a few more digits so you can see the extent, and I took off a little bit of the rounding. But if you look at the liability payment this year, it's about $3.688 billion with contributions of $2.56 billion for a net cash flow of $1.128 billion. So when we go to the portfolio and we start to earn money, we earn about $266 million from dividends from our stocks. We earn about $162 million from interest in our fixed income portfolio, and we earn about $55 million in distributions from our real estate, and that adds to $483. So when you subtract the $1.128 billion minus the $483, there's where you get your $645 million, and so that's what we're having to hit the market to do. Now you can see the moving parts here, right? So if we can get more contributions, we can lower our liquidation target. If we can increase our yield, we can lower our liquidation target. But now what we have in front of us is a map to try to figure out how we get to where we need to be. The one thing we do know is that $3.688 billion doesn't change. It's these other things that we have to increase in order to make that liquidation target at the bottom lower. Katie, if you could advance the slide. And so now we're talking about this year. Excuse me. We're talking about this year, but let's think about this over the longer term, because if you think about what my long-term vision is, this graph drives it. So that top line is benefit payment as a percent of the assets. So it's kind of the $3.7 billion that we have to pay divided by the roughly $34 billion we have in assets. The contribution as a percent of assets is about that $2.6 billion that the state sends divided by the $34 billion. So you can see that what we owe is less than what we're getting in state contributions. Well, that 3.3% is what we have to make up, right? So ideally what we would do is have a portfolio that yielded about 3.3%, because then we're never interacting with the market. The cash flow we get from dividends and interest payments just goes straight through to our members. It's frictionless and costless. So that should be our goal. But as we'll show, it's a bit of a challenge. So, and the other thing, what you'll see is, you see that drop off toward the tail end. I just want to be very clear and open about this. I just don't see how the net cash flows get much below 5%. So at some level, we're not going to see these big drop-offs like that, because that big drop-off, if you look at it, comes from the contributions falling. I wouldn't expect that to happen that early, but I do want to address it. But I do know that the front end of that graph, the 2021, the 2023 periods, those are very well known, and they're very certain. So we can plan for those. The stuff on the back end of that graph is probabilistically difficult for me to believe. Katie, if you could advance the slide, please. So how does that inform our thinking? So remember, we wanted about 3%. We wanted the portfolio to yield about 3%, so we could get from dividends and interest, and we could just give to the members. Simple and easy, right? Cheap. The truth is, today we're at about 1.4. And all that is the 483 from the previous page divided by about 34 billion in total assets. That's what that 1.4 is. We'd like it to be 3. So you can see that we've got some work to do, number one. And then number 2, even if we can get it to 3, which will be challenging enough, that graph on the previous slide shows that we need to get it to 5, and even higher, which that's difficult for me to believe. But so even if we can get it to 3, and you look out 15 years, 3 is not even going to be sufficient. So we've got some work to do here, and we've got some challenges. And so what does that mean to what happens when I present to you as a group? Katie, if you could advance the slide, please. Our asset class recommendations will be focused on income, and that is generating it, or efficiently harvesting the gains that we need to harvest in order to pay a member's benefit. Because if we can't generate enough income, we know we have to hit the market, okay? And the other thing is liability cash flow management, which means, in simplest terms, we should be meeting certain benefit payments, which we know they're certain, with certain asset cash flows. That just makes sense. And I think that it would be something that you as a board would like to know was happening on a systematic and routine basis. You know, so this is where we need to go, and this is what we'll talk about some more today in the equity portfolio, but we've already started this, and I wanted to bring this in because everything we're doing connects back to this mission, right? Pay the benefit, pay the benefit, pay the benefit, secure the benefit. So if Katie, if you could advance the slide, we've already started. And that was in the fixed income portfolio. Katie, if you could do one more for me, please. And so I wanted to show you all that work we did up to December when you took that vote. What did it mean? I mean, we told you it was marginal, but we told you it had an impact. So if you look at where we were before the moves, that's the part of this box in front of you titled Old Fixed Income Structure. You can see that would have yielded about $153 million a year. This new fixed income structure adds about 20 million to that. So you can see how going from 1.4 to 3 is going to be a challenge because we did a lot of work and we got 20 million out of it, but it's 20 million more that we don't have to hit the market on, and we should be proud of ourselves. But it also shows that those moves, those marginal moves, can start to really compound and accumulate toward this goal, toward this mission. So we've been successful at doing this once, and we should be, and I acknowledge your role in that. So, but what's next? What can we talk about next to help get where we need to go? Katie, if you could advance the slide for me, please. And that would be equities. And Katie, one more. Thank you. So we're going to look at equities the same way we looked at fixed income. There are 3 areas I want to talk to you about today. Each of them is sort of wonky in its own way, and so I won't spend a lot of time trying to get through that wonk today, but there will be meetings where we can work through some of that detail. But the first thing we're going to talk about, consistent with what I described, was how we increase the cash flows from the equity portfolio. Katie, if you could advance one for me. So the first thing it's called cover call strategies. You can Google it and learn about it. But basically what it allows us to do is increase the capital efficiency of our equity portfolio by using options. Options are not an easy instrument to describe in 3 words or less. But as shown earlier, we are net liquidators, right? That's $645 million right now. We do need to come up with that. So covered calls allow us to do that just a little bit more efficiently. And without trying, I came up with an example, and I'll try to throw it out. And man, I sometimes analogies I'm great with, and other times I fall flat on my face. But let's say you own a house, and you don't need to sell it today. You paid 80 grand for it 10 years ago. Market says it's worth 95 today. I come to you and I say, I'll give you 95 for the house. You say, no, I really don't want to sell it, but I'd sell it for 100. I say, well, 100's over the market price, but I tell you what, I'll give you $1,000 today to hold the house for me for 30 days to see if the market price increases to 100 grand. And if it does, I get to buy it. But I give you the $1,000. no returns, no questions asked, right? So that's kind of what this notion of rent, or this notion of trying to increase the passive cash flows from your assets, is kind of what options allow you to do, and this is no different. So if you could advance one slide for me, Katie. Specifically, covered calls, what they allow you to do is sell some potential upside. You don't know that you're going to get it, but you can sell it today for income, and the income goes straight to the beneficiaries, right? The cons are that if the market goes up through time, eventually that upside that you sold, you're going to have to come good on it, and the return you earn from these covered call strategies will be just a little bit below what you would earn from just owning the equities long forever. But I want to take a point here, because we can't own the equities long forever. We are net liquidators. We're going to be selling. So we have to understand that in our methods and our modes of operation, is that no matter what we do, we're going to be selling. So if we can turn that selling into certain cash flow today, then we're one step closer to where we need to be. So I want to show this relationship graphically but quickly, because this is what we call a hockey stick chart, and it's complicated to both look at and describe. But Katie, if you could advance one slide for me. So basically, if you look at the word covered call and you look at the word stock only, if you do these strategies and that little dotted line goes up in between those two words, you're not going to make that money. That's money you give away. Your profit is capped at that blue line that's just above the word stock appreciation. But what you got for it was this thing we call call premium, which is that blue arrow between the dotted line and the solid blue line. So you earn some income on your asset, but if the market gets real good, you're going to have to come good on your end of the bargain, and you're going to have to sell your house for $100,000, even though you know full well now that the market price is 105, right? That's where this strategy doesn't work for you. But it did allow you to, one, earn most of the profit, because remember, you went from 95 to 100, and you got the $1,000. So now you're at 101, and the market price is at 105. And you need the income because you have to pay bills. So there's an opportunity cost associated with it, but I don't want to act like this is a low returning thing, because it's just simply not. So if you flip forward one more slide, what it is lower risk. So if you look at that blue box, the dark blue box toward the top and in the middle, the horizontal axis, beta to the S&P 500, just think of that as risk. When you think about market risk, you're looking at a beta of 1, and that's those dotted lines or with the oval circled around it. That's about where the market is. Where these option strategies are in that box, meaning they take less risk, but given the risk they take, they earn the same amount of return as the equity market. They just take less of it. So if you take less risk and you earn the same amount, you just expect to earn less return. So that's kind of what these covered call strategies are. They're just a less risky version of equity. So if you can go down for me, Katie. But what happens in a down market when you own a less risky version of equity? You outperform, because the market goes down 10, and remember our beta was 0.6, so 10% times 0.6 is 6%. You only go down 6%, right? And you're generating that premium that's going to pay the members, and so you're not having to transact in the market during a difficult time. Now, when the markets are up, and I would point you to kind of on the left side of this chart, you can see that gray box that's showing 50% returns or something. These option strategies still did 30, 40. They're not low returning. It's just less than equities. So I want to make sure we get the frame for the kinds of returns we're talking about with these strategies. I want to view this same phenomenon in a way that I find just a little bit easier to look at. So Katie, if you could advance the next slide, that'd be great. So this is the some of the important investment characteristics for different asset classes, you know, in a portfolio. You can see in the return, I have the return and yield bolded out and focused on so we can really look at it. You can see the S&P 500. That would be traditional long equities, right? That's U.S. equities. Everybody kind of has heard of the S&P 500. And on the right side, we have U.S. high yield. And U.S. high yield is kind of the most speculative portion of the bond market. So if you look at this covered call strategy, it sort of sits somewhere in between, right? It's got less return than the S&P 500, but generally more return than high yield. It's got a higher yield than the S&P 500 and high yield, right? So you're kind of sitting somewhere in between what we know to be equity and then what we know to be high yield. Which to show in just a little bit different way, if we can go to the advanced slide, or if we can advance the slide, Katie, please. Remember the last discussion when we talked about liability matches and how to really take your liability and match it with an asset so that it's hedged? Well, if you kind of think about that risk spectrum, that's that arrow on the left. And so those boxes basically say if you want a maximum liability match and you want low risk and low return, because those two things go together, you can see that you have kind of long maturity credit and treasuries and then intermediate credit, and you start working up the risk curve as you go up that box. And you can see at the top of that first box, it says high yield and private credit. So those things are the riskiest portions of that kind of, you know, liability matching profile. The more you move up to the high risk or the minimal liability match areas, you start moving into the equities, right? Covered calls is kind of on the bottom end. They're more like a liability matching instrument than just large cap equities, but they're still not as good as, say, high yield. And so you're kind of in this gray area, sort of a, you know, the high desert, so to speak. It's just, it's not something that gets a lot of attention. And so that's one of the reasons why everybody doesn't run to it, because it's kind of hard to explain because you're in that covered call or you're in that gray area. But the attributes of it, as we showed in the previous slide based on that yield, are very important to us now. So maybe trekking out into that area is worth doing. If you can go down a slide for me, Katie. The other thing you should be concerned with in this discussion is the risk of the got my timer here, making sure I'm keeping good time. The risk of these instruments. So now we've blocked out, grayed out the return areas, and now we're just looking at the risk. And as you can see here, just like all these graphs have built one on the other, what we're doing is somewhere between equity and high yield in volatility, in Sharpe ratio, in beta, and in max drawdown. You can kind of see that same symmetry as we move forward. So these instruments, you can depend on them to be in that zone. And that's important, because when we do these things, we don't want to do them and then have whatever we're doing change on us very quickly. This is a very engineered profile, and it's very much the expectation of what we would get. So Katie, if you could advance the slide. So where do we go now? You know, over the next 2 months or so, we'll provide more education on these covered call strategies. We'll go into the detail more. We'll bring people in that have different perspective. And then ultimately, I'd like to allocate a portion of the equity portfolio to these things with the appropriate benchmark, one that shows all of these different risk dimensions and return dimensions that I've described above. But there's still a lot of detail that you need to know. And, you know, we will not ask until I'm comfortable that everybody has the information they need to make their decision for or against. So that's kind of where we're at now. Not asking for anything today. So if you could advance the slide, Katie, we're going to talk about the second concept in that list. And it talks about the entire capitalization structure. And you say, what? Just make it easy on me, which I'll do that. And then all value-adding strategies, basically how to create competition with private equity fee dollars. So let's start with this capitalization thing just to kind of clear that mud. So Katie, if you could advance for me. Thank you. This, my entire career, it was always curious to me, and even at Mosier's, I did this. So when I think about equities and equity, right? The most liquid equity sector is the large cap. It's the S&P 500. It's the Amazon. It's the Alphabets. It's those, right? They trade in big size, and you can get to your money whenever you need it, even if you don't like the price. Then you flip down and you have mid cap, and then you go down and you have small cap, and then we do this big jump, bam, right over to private equity. And I've always been curious because private equity is very expensive. So if you can put some money into microcap, I mean, the name microcap probably says that it can't be a big allocation, right? You can't have a macro allocation to a microcap strategy. So it's you can't have a lot, but you can use that sector of the market to increase liquidity, lower fees, but keep return expectations high. And so that's kind of the way microcap, I think, should be used in a portfolio. And remember, microcap managers manage around 1%, for around 1% on assets. The average private equity fee dollar is 4 to 6%, somewhere in that zone. So you get a huge fee savings. So, even if the microcap manager can frankly do 5% less good than the private equity manager, and we can still end up net in the same place. So, and while they're not liquid, I wouldn't call them liquid. They do at least have some liquidity, right? So you can slowly enter the market to buy or sell. You just have to be careful about moving it. Whereas with private equity structures, obviously there's no liquidity there at all unless you want to go into the secondary market. Katie, if you could advance the slide for me. I thought this table would be informative for you. Mariana put this together for us. I think it's incredibly instructive, and I think if you just look at a few of the key metrics to look at, you can see the average market cap, how similar the microcap public equity market is to the private equity market. You can see how private equity has more leverage than the microcap market, or frankly every other market besides small cap, which remember that, private equity and leverage, that'll be a point that comes up pretty soon. And you can see that even if we do microcap, you do get a dividend yield, right? So at least we have that, again, that marginal bit of cash flow going toward the benefit payment. You're not really getting that with private equity. So, those are the competitive factors that make a microcap investment and a private equity investment, at least for some amount, a reasonable comparison. So, Katie, if you could advance for me, please. So over the next couple of months, along with our staff and along with the presentations on covered calls, I'd like to talk about the microcap market. And we also have, SERS has an existing overweight to small cap stocks, and we just want to make sure that structural formation of the overweight to small cap stocks is still what we want. Ultimately, I'd like to allocate a portion of the equity portfolio to microcap strategies. Ideally, we reduce private equity to pay for that strategy, but it doesn't have to come from there necessarily. So that's that part of it. That was the second bullet point, the piece that said capitalization. That's what I just went over. So now what I want to go over is the second part of that bullet point, which was finding ways to get strategies that compete for private equity dollars. So if you could advance the slide for me, Katie. Why do we have private equity? My answer is it's higher return. And I assume that's going to be the common answer amongst everybody, is that we own private equity and the complication and all this stuff we have to deal with because we need the extra return. And that's fine. So let's quantify the extra return. So we assume 7%. With the latest returns I had, it appeared to me that you earned about 1.4% more for owning private equity than public equity. That's that assumed attribution return column, 7.3 and 8.7. That means if you think about the 14% that's allocated to private equity, for earning 20% or 20 basis points more, which is 20%, than what we would if we just own the S&P 500, say. So that's what we're thinking we're going to earn. So in effect, what does that mean? If you took private equity out of the portfolio today, you would go from 7 to 6.8 out of the gate, no questions asked. So we need to keep, at least at this point, we can't throw the return away. We've got to find a way to keep that return. And by the way, that 7% was built on an interest rate curve that was probably 1% higher than what it is today, at least. So we've got to keep that extra return in the portfolio. But we all know that right now, the only way we're getting that is through private equity. And that means we're concentrating into one strategy, and that one strategy isn't as slam dunk as what people want to make it. I mean, there's a lot more money flowing into it. There's a lot more competition. The idea that expecting 20% more out of your private equity than your public equity is getting harder to believe by the day. So what are we going to do in reaction to that competitive challenge? Katie, if you could advance. So one of the ways we answer that competitive challenge is to say, well, how do they get the extra return? Come on, I mean, are they magic? Is it just dust and they sprinkle it and it makes everything grow faster? That's not true. Mostly it's leverage. Let's just, take the varnish off and not the sales pitch is in the drawer. That it's because these private equity folks and to be fair, their judicious use of leverage, because many of them use it as a productive tool, not a destructive tool, but it's leverage nonetheless. So if you know that's the source of the risk factor, if you know that's the risk factor you're trying to replicate to get the extra return, leverage is not hard. There's all sorts of forms of leverage in the market. Most of them are much lower cost than private equity. Because private equity generally, the sponsored companies are generally pretty high sources, high cost sources of leverage. So they're expensive. So what's the point? Right, Seth? Just get to it because you're going to go over time if you're not careful. So let's advance the slide. And I'm just going to read the words. My question is, can staff with a consultant explore strategies that are intended to earn the extra return required by our asset modeling? You say, well, shoot, you ought to be able to do that, but that's cryptic. So tell me what I need to know before I answer. And so if we could advance the slide, I'll give it a shot. Before we start talking about this stuff, what you need to know is that while I think these are good ideas, they do not offer the lowest fees. They offer lower fees than private equity, but in general, you would still term them high fee, and they do not reduce complexity. So what's the common theme here? When you're looking for this extra return, it comes with those things we don't want. So we kind of have to say, well, what are the things, how can we manage those things that we don't want? So specifically, if you wanted to do your own homework in the time that we have between meetings, specifically what I'm referring to is it's commonly called portable alpha. I would tend to refer to it as enhanced cash. But nonetheless, we ran it for a long time at Mosier's, and it was, without a doubt, the best return stream I've ever seen. If you manage the risk, you've got to have a smart risk management system or you don't do these things, period. But if you do that right, they offer an awesome excess return profile with a public equity risk movement. The all-in fees, even though you earn the same amount of return, are about half of what the private equity dollar costs. And the leverage is achieved through derivatives. Plain vanilla, not the Warren Buffett blow up the world derivatives. These are very regulated derivatives that are used. So the risk there is not what the common media would have you believe it is, but they are derivatives. the truth is inside those derivatives, the leverage is cheaper than the leverage in private equities. So what now? Katie, if you can advance the slide. Ultimately, I would like to be able to consider all strategies that have an expected return of public equity plus 1.4%. And the reason why is if I can look at a private equity manager and say, yeah, this product, this pitch book looks real good to me. But you know what? I have something else that's appealing too. So it's a lot cheaper. So if you can't kind of come to me on fees, then I have another option. And if we expect private equity managers to lower their fees until we can do that to them, then that's not my expectation. That's what I would tell you. I think we would be fooling ourselves. So what I want to do with this is I want to educate on this topic over the course of the next year. There are a lot of things in here to unwrap, and we don't need to be in a hurry to do it. But we should be deliberate about how we think about this from a competitive position. So don't worry about decisions. We'll get there, and we'll have plenty of time for a good, deliberate discussion on the risk associated with these things. Katie, if you could advance the slide for me, and we're getting there. We're getting there, guys. So the last bullet point that I wanted to talk about was this number 3, which is ensure that the portfolio is always invested to maximize yield, and some ancillary things which we'll talk about. So let's explore that concept some. Katie, if you could advance the slide for me. Today, that table in the middle of the page kind of shows how things are set up, right? The target for domestic equity, how we're actually invested, and the fact that looks just fine because the range, it's within the range next to it, right? And you go down and it's that same way for each one of those rows. The problem is the sum of the target allocation is 56%. The sum of the actual allocation is 59%. So if you look at those ranges off to the side, how far could you push that 59% and nothing would ever look like it was out of whack? So you as a board member need to know how much we have invested in equities. And so what I would like to talk about and propose is another way of doing this that would very much make that a focal point. And Kate, if you could advance the slide, it's on that page. So here's another way, hypothetically. And this is a hypothetical example. The numbers in the page, I mean, really, I grabbed them out of the air and threw them on the slide. But I kind of looked at what we had talked about and came up with this table. So if you look at that target allocation, those are the same targets, except for the microcap allocation. So you can see that target allocation adds to 56%. The actual allocation adds to 61. It's very clear now. And also what you would do is you would have a range around your equities. So you can see that the total equity allocation is within the range and everything looks good. One thing I want to point out very specifically in this is the private equity row. So while my numbers are hypothetical, if you look to the range, it says 10 to 14%. Katie, if you could go back up one slide to 31, that'd be great. So if you look at private equity in that slide, what does it say? It says NA, there isn't a range. So what does that mean? Like we can be as low as we want or we can be as high as we want. What I don't, Katie, so if you can go back to 32, what I don't think an NA does for you as a board is put proper governance structure around that, and you deserve that. And what I mean by that is we're not doing this. We're managing this very, very well and very deliberate with all our eyes toward what the board expects and wants in this area. But the truth is, without this tool, without this guardrail on the right side, 10 to 14%, what stops us from just, what happens when we go over? Do we keep investing in private equity? Do we sell? What is it that we do? So all those questions need answered. And so when you put this range in, it's pretty clear that anything outside of there has an explanation associated with it. and chances are what we'll do is we'll go back and refine our management tools, and we'll try to make sure we're within that range at all times, because who really wants to describe why you're over or under that? So I think just from my standpoint. And you know, there's a million reasons why leaving it at NA is the easiest method for me. I think coming, you know, from your perspective, if I were in your chair, I would want that boundary, because I know how that would force the investment team to then think about how they allocate to that asset class and the challenges that range puts on them. So, you know, Katie, if you could advance to 33. Ultimately, I'd like to combine the public and private equity allocations like that second slide showed, so that we could manage to the high level equity allocation and allow some movement in the sub lines. And I want to put those rules around private equity. So that's the other thing we'll explore. I mean, I would ask for it, but to be fair, you guys deserve to know that there are challenges to that range when you put them in. I believe they can be readily managed, but there are challenges. So that's equities. Katie, if you could advance the next slide. And we're almost done. I think I'm still under an hour, so I'm happy with myself. So where do we go after equities? And it's still, again, this is still all about the benefit payment, right? And what you know, and the reason the liability and the benefit payment match, you can think of it this way: as soon as you pay that liability or that benefit payment, your liability declines by the same amount theoretically, right? So that benefit payment is the monetization of that big liability that we always talk about. Benefit payment is just a little ice cream scoop that every year just takes a little bit of it off, right? Unfortunately, we tend to add quite a bit. So, you know, so after equities, what do we want to do? And this is something, Katie, if you could advance the slide. This idea is something that I think will be the next big thing in public pension fund management, because it's so common sense. You know, we've established here that we're net liquidators, right? It's going to be hard for us to get to that 3% target. And we know even if we get to 3, it's going to become 5. So at some point we are net liquidators. And so if we're net liquidators, it's reasonable for you, for me, for anybody to say, do we have a plan that reflects the certainty of the benefit payments with the certainty of the asset cash flows we need? Do we have a plan for that? And if the answer is no, and you scratched your head, I think that's a fair response. So let's take a look at the numbers to put some objectivity around what we're talking about here. So if you could advance the slide for me, Katie. This is us. You know, this is the next 5 years of the high level important financial information that you need to know. So it goes back to the earlier slides, right? It's the same format. So benefit payment, you can see it across the next 5 years. And you got to remember, the actuary would tell you that these are like 95% certain. So there is no doubt that benefit payment is a fair calculation. That you know, maybe there's a 5% up or down movement that could occur, but these things are pretty solid numbers. These contributions in the next 2 or 3 years are probably good. In the next 5 years are reasonable. So you can kind of plan for your future in those next 5 years. Your total yields, those again, you're trying to make projections, and liquidation targets and such flow from those formulas. So if you're looking at that going, well, if you're certain we owe it, and we're fairly certain that those are roundabout numbers, or they are materially correct in the sense of auditing, what's our plan for hitting those things, right? Shouldn't we be coming up in this first column of 2021? Shouldn't I have a plan to tell you about coming up with $54 million a month that we need in order to make these benefit payments? Wouldn't that make you more comfortable? Would me. So that's what we want to bring to you. Is things like this, because this is the new and rising risk in what we do. We're paying benefit payments, they're getting bigger, and we've got to address this front end of that benefit payment obligation. So because why? Because we have to pay the benefits, and if equities are down like they were in March, and we have to go hit the market, and let's say for whatever reason bond yields are up at the same time, which wouldn't be a good time to sell anything. And here we are in the market trying to raise benefit payments. We want to avoid that. So having a plan to make sure those payments are made 2 and 3 years in advance, creates the ability to live through those tough periods and liquidate on our terms. And I think that's what this does, is builds our defenses and our moat just a little bit deeper. So if you can go forward one slide for me, Katie. Well, did I do that? I can read the slide. It'll be okay. One of the things that this does is it really does help. So if you think about now, we've got the benefit payments made. We're not having to find cash every month. Everything's taken care of. You don't need a large cash balance, or as large a cash balance anymore. Cash is at basically 0%. So we can take some of that cash and invest it in longer maturing bonds and earn more yield, right? So that in the margin, it helps us get to our mission. Because we have this front end of the benefit payment obligation made, and we're certain, it allows us to use our fixed income portfolio. We can take another step toward that LDI direction, because what we know is our benefit payments are made. So if we step in the LDI direction, what do we do with the yield? We increase it again. So now our cash flow position is benefited. So it allows us to incrementally walk out that LDI curve just a little bit. These are marginal moves. And also what it does is it just avoids the need to hit markets at times when we're just not ready to hit markets. Even if markets are trading in our favor, even if, say, equities go down and bonds go up. And so we can say, oh, hey, we can sell some bonds for benefit payments because that's the asset that went up. At that point in time, because the market volatility and the other things going on, you still might be paying oversized bid-ask spreads, and that's a cost. So the more we can just plan for this, I'll call it frictionless cash flow, to pass through to the benefit payments, the better off we're going to be, because it allows us to make sure that our near-term obligations are met and our focus is on the long-term aspects of what we do. And so I think this is a critical tool, and I really do think it's going to become the next thing that comes to pension fund management, which is good because it's sorely needed. And so on the last slide, basically what it says is by next fall, I'd like to at least start the education to better understand this dynamic of how we can basically, defease the front end of our liability payment curve. So, and again, remember, we're net liquidators, so we need to generate cash flow. And that's what this whole presentation is about. And that's what we'll be working on over the course of the next year. Now I'm done, without knowing the exact time, but I will entertain questions. 45 minutes it looks like, so we're good. Mr. Jordan.
Thanks, Seth. Great presentation. I guess I'm trying to just sort of wrap my head around the concept here. And, if I'm understanding this correctly, what we're working on here is just a big cash flow problem. And your analysis, with the portfolio yield at 483, and that equals 1.4% of the portfolio, and that doesn't really take into account any unrealized gains that we get in the portfolio. That $483 million is just dividend and interest and other miscellaneous income. Is that correct?
Correct. You can think of it as we don't pay anything to get that. That's just part of the contract we agreed to when we bought that asset.
Right.
So it's passive cash flow, maybe is how they refer to it sometimes. It's not capital appreciation, it's the passive cash flow. And so yes, you've got a cash flow problem, and here are some ways to address it. But ideally, though, we're still going to be able to get the cash flow problem a little bit better managed. But with that long-term aspect of what we do, we're still going to have the capital appreciation component out there, right? I mean, it doesn't go away. We still have to hit 7. So
right, and I guess I historically have always thought sort of in the actuarial kind of way, that what's our funded ratio, blah blah blah. How does that impact the employer rate and everything? But what you're presenting here is, with our portfolio yield, sort of this free cash flow or passive cash flow, where it's at, and being net liquidators, that also having to liquidate that amount either annually or monthly cuts into our total yield and our unrealized gains, because we're liquidating those equities or whatever at potentially inopportune times. Is that right?
Right, they're holding it in cash. So if they go up 1%, which isn't necessarily a big return for equities, if they go up 1%, you don't have that money invested. So it's how do we keep? It's about efficiency, and that's really how do we use our assets as efficiently as possible? Because and also as it goes back to, you think about how we structure the asset allocation, right? So we go through these big asset allocation exercises, and a lot of times, like we would say, the primary goal is 7, right? We got to hit 7. Which I'm not suggesting we change that. Maybe through time we can change our perspective on that. But you come out and you say, well, okay, so the primary goal is 7. The secondary goal is to get to 7 with as much yield as possible, right? So then you start thinking about your portfolio in a slightly different way. What assets are good for it and what assets are not as good for it, right? And so all of these things inform those decisions. And they help make a portfolio that's better focused on the mission, which is to pay benefits. And ideally, there's some collateral benefits like lower fees and other things. But let's keep our eye on the mission. And if those collateral benefits occur, then that's great too. Does that get to your question?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, this is a whole different way of thinking, to me at least, and it's very foreign to me. So I've got to turn my hat around the other way and start thinking in a different manner about this. So this was very good. Thank you.
Should I be happy about that or worried?
No, it's going to take me a while to fully understand this, but the more of these things you kind of do, I guess it'll be very helpful. Thank you.
Very well. Alan, I see your hands up.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Seth. Very interesting. And, as we, expressed before, the notion of matching up the assets with the liabilities, seems to us to be much in line with that fundamental purpose of making the benefit payment. But something else that I wanted to kind of draw some more attention to, you mentioned, the ability where, if you know that you've got cash coming into the portfolio, to cover your short-term benefit payments, then, we're not having to hit the market at inopportune times. One of the slides that was in the recent distribution from Jim Nolan in the periodic monthly reporting, I think it was the most recent slide deck that went out, showed how significantly the market declined and then how significantly it recovered from the COVID pullback. And while I'm not saying that folks can necessarily time market tops and bottoms, from the bottom of the market from the COVID pullback back to at least at the point of publication when he sent that slide deck out, I think the increase from the bottom of the market to the top was in excess of 100%. And so is part of the reason why this type of strategy is more effective. Not just that you're not having to hit the market and sell those assets at that point in time, but if we ultimately get to the point where we've got the cash flow to make sure we know we've got the benefit payments covered, but we can be more opportunistic in deploying capital into a market where the bottom's kind of fallen out at that point in time, but where you might be able to have that kind of major upside on the back end of it as things kind of restabilize, as we saw with the pullback from the COVID pandemic.
I think that is a huge benefit of this, and what it does is allows you to keep your mind on with equities or long-term assets, and if you're using them to meet short-term obligations, that's a scary premise. So if you would have entered the pandemic, let's say most people in this room can replay this down because they were here around the pandemic, right? Coming from somebody from Missouri who lost a football game because of 5 downs, but the truth of the matter is that if we would have known the benefit payments were made, you would have not worried about that piece of it. Like we're comfortable with it. Can we confirm that it's going to get paid? then what do? Let's focus on where these things are at. And are equities really worth half of what they were worth yesterday or two weeks ago? Really is about something in that zone. And so we can start asking those longer term tactical questions. And I think that discussion is bound to add value to this fund through time. And those are the collateral benefits. They let you stay focused on the right things for the right reasons. And we wouldn't, if we had 2 or 3 years of liability benefit payments kind of defeased, going through that moment, we don't have to get another 3 months back on until we're comfortable doing it. So even then, we can think about things in a little longer term context. Than we don't want to behave in an emergent way around the liquidation assets. that's a bad recipe. And I think this mitigates or manages that risk. Almost eliminates it. So that's why we should do it. But all of those things you mentioned are perfect examples of how this helps. Did that get to your question, Alan?
Absolutely. Thank you.
There's another hand up.
Secretary Begg.
Secretary?
Seth, thank you. Another superb presentation on a critical topic. My question is there going to be a test on this material at the end of the board meeting?
No test, and I'm not asking you to do anything. I just want you to know, number one, that there are other ways to generate income with our portfolio, that we should be investigating them, and give you a little bit of high-level overview, and then that's the direction we're gonna push off here. So
I also have a suggestion, Chairman Philman, that we get 2 hours of education credit for every 1 hour that Seth presents, just given the scope of what he covers. So, just kidding.
Well, I don't. Does that mean I need to make it easier?
No, I'm just teasing you, Seth. I think your presentations are superb, and I think the material is critical.
Well, I appreciate that. Hopefully, as an education session, hopefully we all sort of learned a little something. Representative Schimmel has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Seth. It was a fascinating presentation. I had not been thinking about it in that bifurcated way. I do hope as you make the presentation, I guess, in fuller extent as you move forward with the recommendation, that you have a full explanation of the risks, because I am concerned about the risk involved in some of those strategies. I'm not an expert, so we're looking to you, but I'm sure the board would want to know that in its totality.
Yes, sir. No fear. That is the way I will approach it. The return comes from the risk you take, so you need to know what risk you're taking, and hopefully the return compensates for it. But absolutely, there'll be a full education on the risks involved. Are there any others? Okay. Well, so I am done. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Seth. Very good. Let me say this. I obviously, that's one of the reasons why we brought you on board is your experience out there with not only Mosers, but your background in the private sector as well. I've been on the board, as I said, since 2001. I've seen 4, 5, 6 different CIOs come through here. And I think the fact that you're really laying it all out, and mostly in layman's terms, that all of us aren't into this business as you are tightly, it really helps for us to understand the concepts. And as we look at the asset allocations and our investments in general, you give us a good idea of bringing those ideas to the table. So I appreciate that. Okay, and good time too within that hour. We still have some more agenda items. Next will be the report of Executive Director Terry Sanchez. And so you're up, Terry.
Okay, well, nothing near as exciting or interesting, actually, as what Seth just went through. I thought that was very interesting. Thank you, Seth. And I just, board, this approach of first providing education and information around decisions that you're expected to make is the same, and something that we're all working to do. We've heard your request, and Seth is the guy to do it. Certainly on the investment side, just outstanding. So anyway, on my report, more mundane things. On Katie Matthews' behalf, a reminder that financial disclosure filings are due May 1st, although SERS would appreciate them sooner if at all possible. They were emailed out to you all this year instead of sent out in hard copy. And then also, as a reminder, Chris Houston has his conflict of interest questionnaires due around the same time. And for most, although not all, that questionnaire was sent out together with the financial disclosure filings request. On another matter, as you may know, expanding our social media presence is one of the goals of the external communications portion of our strategic plan. So, in support of that goal, I'd like to announce that our first SERS Insights blog is now live on the SERS website, thanks to Tom Durr. He's really been the driver behind our social media presence, and it is available on the resource tab on our website. And our own Mary Soderberg is the first blog author. She shares her insights and her personal experience about the importance of contributing regularly to the SERS deferred compensation plan. I read the blog prior to its being posted, and along with a couple of others of us, and actually we all thought it was a great read, something that our members and participants will find, I think, both interesting and informative. So thanks, Mary. We're well on our way to our new presence and our new entry into another way to communicate with our members and participants. Mary's also recommended a friend and colleague who works as a legislative staffer who has also expressed interest in writing about her experience. And as you may also know, increasing our engagement and participation with you, the board, is another aspect of our external communications effort. So we are inviting our board members and designees to contribute your ideas and suggestions as well. So just reach out to us if there's a particular topic you're interested in, and we'll be happy to work with you and get a blog written and post it on our website, and then we'll promote it on our social media. So I thought that was very interesting. And again, thank you very much, Mary.
Hey, it was fun.
All right.
You know, everyone has a different learning curve, and my experience with deferred comp, it was a struggle at first. You know, it took me a while to understand it. That was what I was trying to write in the blog. It's like, you know, you start small, you start early.
It was great. It was great. I mean, it really was. I would encourage you all to take a read. I mean, it was real well written and conversational, and it really just put to true life experience the value of one of our primary products that we offer to our participants, a voluntary product at that. So good job, and we're on our way on another new adventure here at SERS. Another thing that we had done was we had our first agency-wide virtual meeting just a few weeks ago, and basically we invited the whole agency to a Teams meeting, and we basically shared our collective accomplishments, and we reviewed our strategic plan, and we discussed our goals for the year. And actually, it was also, quite frankly, an opportunity to just touch base with everybody. You know, in this virtual world, we hardly see people, and then, you know, small groups may see each other, but being together as an agency just you know, doesn't happen. So we decided to do something at least virtually. And as part of that, we invited, and Chairman Philman accepted, an invitation to open up that meeting and speak to the agency. And, you know, as chairman of our board, and I wanted to thank him for that. I certainly appreciated it, and I am certain that the rest of our staff did. It was great to have show the board representation, and particularly the chairman of the board show up at our agency meeting. So, Chairman, I just wanted to again thank you for your support and showing up at our meeting.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And then just as a reminder, we are working on finalizing the agenda for the board retreat coming up, March 25, 26. We're working that out. Originally, it's scheduled as a time for us to get together, and we had one 2 years ago. Actually, we were, I think, a week away from having one last year, and the COVID-19 hit, where we had to not get together and keep to ourselves, if you will. So we are planning to do something this time, but it will be virtual. And there'll be probably a couple educational sessions, and we believe some business matters, as we've been discussing with the DC committee, probably a joint DC and Finance and Member Services Committee meeting, and probably a very brief board meeting. So we'll work out those details real soon and get them out to you as well, so you won't have to wait too long for all of that. That pretty much wraps up my administrative report. In terms of the legislative update, you can find in board docs under 9A, Romanet II, you will find our legislative update. If you have any questions on that, feel free to reach out. Tom and I, actually Sarah, and when he can, Seth, have started our meetings with leadership with the General Assembly, looking out for SERS best interests. So they're coming along actually rather well.
Terry, Mary has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Seth. Mary?
Just really quick, I just wanted to comment on your legislative report. I found it very informative, very interesting, and very useful. So thank you.
Very much appreciated. Thank you for your feedback, Mary. We'll make sure it stays that way. So the feedback, very helpful. Okay, and Seth, thanks for keeping your eye out for me. I kind of get wrapped up and looking everywhere but back on the screen, so thank you. And then that takes me to my last item. You will find the board adjudication results and dismissals, and that is in board docs 9A Romanet III. And there are the results of 3 notational ballots that are in there, the account of Gary E. Smith Sr., and the results of those notational ballots had been received, and the board granted the system's motion to dismiss claimant's appeal related to his application for and receipt of a disability benefit, which has been discontinued, and this appeal is dismissed with prejudice. The second is on the account of Daniel J. Kerbacher. The State Employees Retirement Board has denied claimant's request to be exempted from the annual compensation limits as required by Section 5506.1 of the SERS Code and Section 401A.17 of the Internal Revenue Code. And thirdly, the account of K.S. Chick. The State Employees Retirement Board has denied claimant's request for a waiver of the service credit adjustment of her account and recalculation of her benefit to eliminate double credit for the same service. And then there is one board dismissal, and these are these are orders that can be approved and signed by Chairman Philman pursuant to a board resolution that delegates authority to him to perform ministerial functions in uncontested matters on behalf of the board. They don't have to come into the full board. And they're typically things where, again, they're uncontested and basically cleaning up some things where there may have been appeals filed and then eventually they may have been repealed or taken back. So it's just a matter of closing up those matters. And the account of Tara L. Snyder was dismissed with prejudice, and that was closed. And that concludes my report, Chairman.
Thank you, Terry. I can't believe the last time we were together with that retreat was almost 2 years ago. Holy mackerel.
I know. And it was so nice. You know, I really miss it. I can't wait to get together. I really am looking forward to actually physically getting together in a room with you all again. And for the first time with some of you, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, and for the new members, obviously the retreat gives us an opportunity to be off the record in parts, and also to get some real brainstorming as far as where we're going, and hopefully for the next year give some direction to the staff as far as where we need to be and go. So yeah, it's unfortunate we can't be together, but we will be together
Someday soon.
That's right. With that, there's no Chief Investment Officer nor Chief Financial Officer report, and we would be into executive session. So, Joe, do you want to tee that up, please?
Yes. In executive session, the board will be discussing with counsel a draft administrative adjudication, 2 litigation status reports, and the compliance report on referrals of prospective or existing investment transactions or contracts. These are privileged and confidential attorney-client communications that the Sunshine Act allows to be conducted in executive session.
Okay, we'll get the okay that we're in executive session.
Yep, take us a minute. We'll let you know.
Sure.
You can proceed with your meeting now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. It was a good, productive 2 days. And by gum, it's 3 o'clock, which says that on the agenda as well. I only have a couple of announcements to finish out our meeting. As Terry indicated, look for information on the board retreat dates, but hold the 25th and 26th of March open for that, obviously virtual. And the next meeting of the State Employees Retirement Board will be April 27th and the 28th. So those are the final announcements. Can I have a motion for adjournment, which is non-debatable?
So moved.
It's been moved. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Take care. It's 60 degrees and sunny in Hummelstown right now, and I'm going to go outside and enjoy it. So hopefully you will be also. So thank you, everybody, and see you next time.